Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's from confidence, comfort, and just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and one thing you probably already know is we're here with Mike Simmons, the founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jody.
All right, Mike. It's summertime and you're in Arizona. How has it been?
It's been hot.
Yeah, tell me about hot. We had a day, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, where it got up to 81. I was about to die. I was so hot.
I'm not sure if the low has been 81 in the last 2 months, maybe. I don't know, but I'm sure that those who are out there listening have no interest in the Arizona weather. It's hot. We can talk about Arizona weather a little bit later in the year when it cools down. And that's why most people live out here, is when the weather's nice and cool.
Okay. Well, instead of the weather, let's talk about pipelines. I have a couple of questions, but first, I don't want to use words or jargon that people aren't familiar with. So I know, Mike, maybe sometimes I make it too basic, but I always like to clarify some things before we get going. So when I say pipeline, what is it we're talking about?
Yeah, for me, it's the total opportunity that we're working on. We either as an organization or as an individual sales rep, or then in the middle of their teams. But it's the total number of opportunities, and not number by count, total number of opportunities and the value associated with those opportunities. And value would be, what is the expected revenue or expected sales booking number? I know those are two different things, and organizations will look at these differently. But what is the expected money that we'll generate based on the opportunities that we're working on, or on all the opportunities that are out there? And then total number of opportunities that are out there. And I actually jumped in front of myself by saying expected. It's total value of those numbers. Expected starts to get into forecasting, which again, we can get into a lot of detail around difference between pipeline and forecast. But pipeline is the whole. So think of pipeline would be the entire apple pie that you have. And forecast is whatever the expected revenue or the expected amount of that apple pie that you might eat.
We've gone from weather to apple pie.
Hey, we are as American as it gets.
Okay, so the pipeline, when we're trying to fill the pipeline, get more prospects in there, what are some of the common challenges that professionals usually have with building a pipeline?
Yeah, one is actually doing the work and going out and identifying customers, whether that's you going out and doing some cold outreach, or it's participating in events, or it's doing some content marketing to generate some demand so that those people find you. One of the first challenges is getting in front of those people, the people who you might be able to enter into a business opportunity with, getting in front of those people and adding some sales jargon in here, getting them into the funnel, the top of the funnel. So getting them into this category of, hey, there's a lot of people out there who have no idea there's a lot of people out there in general. Those people are divided into two categories. They either know you exist or they don't know you exist. So know you exist might be top of funnel. A further iteration down on that top of funnel would be know you exist and they're part of your ideal customer profile. So now that's filtering things down even at a deeper level. And then you might say, know you exist, they're part of your ideal customer profile, and you've actually had a conversation with them. The point where you had the conversation with them and can foresee an instance where you would could potentially conduct business with them, that's when I would suggest that you build out an opportunity in your pipeline. And this is part of that pipeline development from a sales perspective. It transitions from marketing into sales when we actually see a business opportunity that we can define. And in the Catalyst sale process, we call that validation. And all we're doing is validating that we could foresee a scenario where we can conduct business with each other. Common mistake that people will make is they'll say, well, I can see a situation where I would do business with a company like Intel as an example, but I've never had a conversation with anybody at Intel. If that's the case, then it's not a valid opportunity.
Okay. So are there different, segments of a pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, think about the funnel. So you mentioned that funnel, and yeah, I did a post on this not that long ago, kind of a play on the whole "where do babies come from," but talk about where does revenue come from. But as we go through this, there's going to be the first stage, which is they're part of this total addressable market that's out there. They either know us or they don't know us, know of us or don't know of us. Then they come down into the next level, which means that we've actually engaged with them or they've engaged with us. And depending on your approach, it could be you could be the one person who goes first and engage with them at the first initially, or they could be the one who engages with you. They fill in a lead form and they show up inside your CRM. So that becomes another layer. Then the layer below that might be we've actually had a conversation with them and we can foresee a scenario where we would do business. That was what I had mentioned about building out an opportunity. It's at that point that they actually become part of as a sales guy on this call, I would think of part of the pipeline that we're actually working on. And then there's additional stages that they'll go through. We've talked about in the context of sales cycle. So validation, qualification, fit, feasibility, proposal, closed won. And these have been talked about a number of times on different podcast episodes. We'll include a link in the show notes to those discussions. Yes, there are stages, and think of this like think of it like a funnel, and then add additional layers of color to the funnel, kind of like one of those Jello molds or parfaits, where you work from the yogurt into the oatmeal into a little bit of the fruit, and then whatever is down at the bottom of a parfait. But each one of these, we're moving through different layers, and at each of those layers, there should be some type of conversion, some type of thing that changes. Think of when you boil water. You put water into a tea kettle. It's in a state where it's liquid. At the point where it hits 212 degrees, it starts boiling, and you get the steam that comes off. There's a transition that takes place at each of these individual stages, and that would be the discussion around how does pipeline develop over time. And with that development over time, you get closer to more accuracy or you should get closer to more accuracy in your forecast. Does that help, Jody?
It does. Okay. So now take us to another challenge in building a pipeline.
So the other one that we get into is business owners, sales professionals, as whatever our role is inside an organization, we tend to be pretty optimistic. So when you're optimistic, you don't want to say no on behalf of your customer. You don't want to be really rigorous around whether or not someone deserves or should be in that pipeline. So one of the most common mistakes is we don't mark things as closed lost. We don't end of life a deal because we always think there's a chance. So one of the more common mistakes, especially when dealing with optimistic sales reps, is that deals will sit in that funnel or sit within that pipeline way too long. And it's important to have a rigorous process that you use to determine, is this deal still valid? If at any point in time that deal is no longer valid, you cannot see a scenario where you would conduct business with that organization or that your two organizations would enter into a business relationship, that deal should be marked as closed loss and it should exit the pipeline, should exit the funnel. And that's okay. We should be okay with that because we're not going to win every deal.
Is that what you said, someone exiting the pipeline? Is that something we should stay on top of and try to keep a pipeline clean?
Absolutely. And one of the most common mistakes, and we see this happen over and over again in organizations, is the build pipeline. And then all of a sudden you get to the end of the quarter or the beginning of the next quarter or end of the fiscal year or beginning of the next fiscal year or end of the calendar year or beginning of the next calendar year, whatever that slice of time is. And now that deal that you just pushed out becomes front and center again. And you don't have an update. Nothing's moved out. So your CFO or somebody in the organization challenges you on the deal and you move it out of pipeline and you go through a pipeline cleanup process, which is not good for the business. It's kind of like collecting a bunch of note cards or mail over in a miscellaneous folder or box and saying, I'm going to get to it, and then having to spend the entire weekend cleaning it up. that ounce of prevention, if you keep your pipeline current, will significantly reduce the amount of extra work that needs to go in long term, where you start treating pipeline like a waterfall, where you have these breakpoints where all of a sudden you've got a pipeline of, and I'm going to throw, let's say, crazy numbers out there. Let's say I've got a pipeline of $10 million out there. And then all of a sudden I go through a cleanup routine at the end of a quarter. Now that pipeline becomes $500,000. I've just significantly impacted what the business in a negative way, where I've been forecasting or I've been talking about all of this opportunity that's much bigger than it really is. And now everybody's surprised because they say, wow, where did all the pipeline go? Where did it evaporate to? And if that happens too late in a given month, given quarter, given year, it creates, you have less of a chance to react to those changes in pipeline. If you can keep your pipeline current and in turn keep your forecast current, and forecast is that portion of the pie that we're actually going to eat, then it has a positive impact on being able to run and manage the business. You can make better choices around technical investments, better choices around human resource investments, better choices around other things that might impact the business.
So if one of the challenges is being too optimistic and keeping them around long enough, at what point do we look at that or say, okay, let's examine some and say, okay, are we too optimistic? Is this realistically one that should still be in the pipeline? How often do you do that?
A lot of it really depends on the total number of deals that might be in your pipeline. If you're a rep who is working on 7 deals in any given period, 7 deals in a month or 7 deals in a quarter or 7 deals in a year, then you're at the 7 deals in a year level, you should be constantly evaluating this, because one of those deals disappearing could have a significant impact on the business. If it's 7 deals in a month and you're held accountable to that, then again, you should be looking at this on a frequent basis, maybe a daily basis, as you work through these transactions that you go through. It really is one of those questions that depends on how your business is operated. Let's say that I've got 45-day sales cycles. Each of the deals on average move through the sales process in a 45-day period. We should be evaluating pipeline consistent, or at least every 15 to 30 days, getting things cleaned up and pushed out of that pipeline. Let's say that I am operating in an environment where sales cycles are more like 6, 18, or 24 months. Then this is probably a monthly or quarterly process.
Okay. We've gone through 2 challenges. What other challenges do we have in building a pipeline?
So the other one that we get is, and I've been accused of this a number of times, but where you sandbag. So you don't put things in pipeline because you're not really sure if they're going to come together, and you don't want to draw a lot of attention to the organization, because as soon as they're in the pipeline, you're going to have a sales manager who's breathing down your neck or knocking on the door and calling you up, asking for updates. So another challenge that ends up happening is you get reps who decide, well, I'm going to wait until this is further down the funnel, further into the sales process, before I actually put this deal into the pipeline or build out an opportunity. That is almost as bad as being overly optimistic about pipeline and not keeping things clean. I say almost as bad because in the not keeping things clean, it can hide some deficiencies that you have, and you could have this bias to believe that the year is going to turn out better than it likely will. On the flip side, if you're very, very cautious about what you put into pipeline and you sandbag, as I've been called before, then the surprise might be a positive surprise, but on the organization side of things, we may not be technically ready to support that huge customer that's coming in. Or we may have made some other decisions that you might not be aware of, where we're reducing staff because the pipeline was light, yet this opportunity existed out there. And if we had line of sight or had known about that opportunity, we might have managed things better. So it works on both sides. One being overly optimistic about being able to get deals done, so you can leave things in the pipeline that really are no longer valid. And then on the other side, it's being overly cautious about putting things in pipeline because you don't want the attention drawn toward them.
Yeah, I can see that one being a problem, and I think I'm sometimes guilty of that, in the way that if I'm not optimistic enough about it, or I have a perception of, oh, this is kind of where the conversation went or where they are in the pipeline, I might actually be wrong and then not give it enough attention. So something that could have been a good prospect, should have been firmly in the pipeline, doesn't get there. I don't know if that's the same as sandbagging, but that's one that I do. I just maybe don't follow up the way I should because I have a perception of how things went or what they really wanted that might be a little different. And so I will borrow your term of sandbagging.
Yeah, the sandbagging is more of that whole idea of, hey, you know what? I had a really good conversation with Jody. Jody is looking to bring in services, maybe it's revenue operations, audit or assessment that you want to bring in. And it was a really good conversation, but I'm not really sure if it's going to happen this month or it might happen next month, or, I don't want to bring a lot of attention to it because I don't really have all the answers to it. So I decided to omit it from my pipeline, and ultimately that omits it from forecast. I think that's another thing that we should distinguish between, and we've talked about a couple of these names and we'll define them in the show notes so that they're there. But pipeline is the sum of all of the opportunity that's out there when we get into the sales side of things. Forecast is the weighted probability of closing that business. So a forecast is a subset of pipeline. If I'm not managing the pipeline well, it will have a negative effect on my ability to forecast with any level of predictability. And there are a lot of people who out there will argue that you can't forecast. I firmly believe that you can forecast if you leverage data and simplify your process.
Okay, we have gone through 3 of the biggest challenges when it comes to building a pipeline. Do you have any final thoughts, Mike, about challenges of building a pipeline?
Yeah, the last one would be just don't get so emotionally attached to it. Don't allow your emotion or your bias to get in the way. Just treat it like the finance and accounting folks would treat it. It's just a number, and be comfortable with the idea of it being a number. And the more numbers you put into the system, the more you can start to adjust, tweak, or change the way that those numbers are evaluated. So if you're creating your own personal filters because either you didn't really know what the next steps were, or you weren't optimistic about a deal being done, or you wanted to hide something from somebody, know that that has some negative implications on some of the tooling that the organization might be building in order to create higher levels of predictability inside their business. So these are just numbers. And just like we've talked about before with sales stuff, sometimes deals will move forward really fast for no reason other than the time was just perfect and the need was there and all the stars align. There are other times, just like playing chutes and ladders, where you move a couple of steps forward and you have to go down a slide or a chute and you're right back at the beginning. That is understood, and it should be understood. That just happens in business where people move organizations get acquired. There are a number of different scenarios that might have a negative impact on a deal. The more data you put into the system, the more informed the system can be, and the better you will get at accurately forecasting your business. And I think that's a good thing to consider when talking about both pipeline development, adding opportunity into the business, and then forecast execution, converting that opportunity into money.
All right. This has been a fun episode, Mike. I like this, digging into pipeline challenges. If you have a question or topic you would like Mike to discuss, go ahead and reach out. You can go to catalystsale.com. That's a great place to start. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for the discussion. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.